$1.6 million. 16 teams from around the world invited to play in Gamescom, Germany at the International 2011 Valve's Dota 2 Championships. $1.6 million. I say that again because this prize pool was absolutely huge in a time where teams across any game would be lucky to play at a tournament with a prize pool of 25,000 total. And here the winner took home a million. This tournament was massive, and it was also absurdly scuffed. There were pauses almost every game. The game itself was incredibly buggy. The format, while actually not being too bad by esports standards in 2011, was pretty scuffed and very volatile. And teams were also only given 3 weeks to practice the game before playing the tournament. But all that aside, this tournament was glorious and it marked the start of what would be one of the biggest brands in all of esports. Format was pretty simple. Four groups of four teams, single round robin best of ones. Top two teams from each group go to the upper, and the bottom two go to the lower. After groups, they play out a massive 16 team double elim bracket. That part of the format is completely fine. I mean, I think that later iterations of TI have the best format in all of esports. The bracket's great though, but the teams play best of ones until the top four. Yeah, every single match in the bracket and the entire tournament, other than the upper bracket final, lower semi and lower final, and grand final, are best of ones. Now, the thing is, this actually isn't that uncommon for this age in esports, because I mean, it was very common to just have lands that were open brackets and you would just play best of ones the whole way through. But I mean, it's still just, it's kind of rough for a world championship. But to be fair, there's a certain other MOBA that was running best of ones in the group stage until 2023. So I guess I can't nitpick about it too much when Valve basically fixed the format the year after for this. Another gripe I had was the team from the upper bracket gets an automatic game advantage in the grand final. I this would probably be for another video, but I'm really not a fan of bracket reset or extra games in the final. I just don't think it's necessary. In my opinion, having to play the extra games is enough. Now, because the teams only played Dota 2 for a couple weeks at most, and because there obviously weren't any tournaments on it before TI, it wasn't completely possible to get an accurate power rating of the teams going into the tournament. People could make pretty good guesses though, because it was obviously Dota 2 is based off of Dota 1, so the game was similar enough that you could get a rough idea. Most of what I've found here is just looking at Liquipedia results from old tournaments from Dota 1 and how the casters talked about each team. The Chinese teams would have been seen as pretty strong because they had a more established scene with tournaments happening far more regularly than there were in the West. Of the four Chinese teams, Invictus Gaming and eHome would likely have been two of the stronger ones, with eHome having a little bit of a drop off, but had dominated the Dota scene in 2010. And IG had actually come off of back to back event wins with CPL Invitational and G1 League heading into the tournament. Tyloo and OK Nirvana China would have likely been seen as quite a bit weaker, as they didn't have any event wins or any particularly high placements. The other two teams from the West that would have been seen as strong would have been Navi and Moscow 5, who consistently went head to head in the grand finals of pretty much every CIS and Eastern European tournament. Navi had some roster changes going into the tournament, but they were widely seen as upgrades, with Puppy and Light of Heaven being the two players they added. Of the rest of the field, MYM would have been one of the stronger Western European teams, and OK Nirvana International. I'm not going to mention the potential conflict of interest there. They also had them in the same group, but I mean, this is kind of just par for the course for early 2010s esports, if we're being honest. But those two would have been the strongest Western European teams. The Southeast Asian teams wouldn't have been seen as quite as strong. I mean, the caster said talked about it multiple times that Scythe Gaming, who ended up being the Southeast Asian team that looked the best and placed the highest, actually hadn't played a tournament in like months heading up to TI, and there just hadn't been a whole lot of tournaments in general in Southeast Asia. So heading into the tournament, they probably wouldn't have been viewed very highly. Overall, it would have been the Chinese teams, IG and eHome, and then Navi and Moscow 5. So the first thing I saw when I looked at the group stage page, I was like, this seems a little bit unbalanced. I don't really know how they decided the group draw. I mean, it's possible it could have been randomized. It's possible they just threw teams together based on whatever. I mean, who knows? I couldn't find anything on it, so I don't know how it was done. But it was a little odd. Group A had eHome and IG, the two best Chinese teams, and the Chinese teams were seen as stronger. So this would have been like literally one and two in most people's power rankings in the same group. Whereas Group B had four like very mid teams. I mean, OK Nirvana International went 3-0 in that group, and I'm pretty sure if you threw them in any of the other groups, they probably wouldn't have made the upper bracket. Just to show you how kind of crazy unbalanced it was. Group C was like whatever. I actually thought Group C was fine. But Group D had Navi and a bunch of Humegalols. I know Scythe got top three, but going into the tournament, there weren't really any high expectations on him. So that's why I say that. Group A had some interesting moments, but overall was pretty straightforward. Its teams were eHome, Chinese team with players like QQQ, who went by 357 at the tournament, MMY or X at the time, and LANM or PLT. Invictus Gaming was also in this group, who had been the strongest team coming out of China. Roster of Zhou, 430, Zhao, Shansheng, and DDC. A Czech and Slovakian stack. Storm Games Clan had no real notable players on it. This team was actually one of the replacement teams because of LGD and DK not going to the event. And the last team was Minsky, a Filipino team with Jules and a player called Vash, who, interestingly, you'll know as Jesse Vash if you're a Valorant fan, which, I mean, that's just a crazy career path on this guy. Apparently, he played Overwatch too, which, I mean, Dota to FPS it's quite the switch. I guess this guy's just a gamer. As expected, though, eHome and IG, for the most part, beat up this group. IG had a scary moment against SGC when they went down in the early game, but Joe's anti-mage, who, by the way, he looked very good on that hero, was able to navigate the map, draw out TPs against SGC's immobile comp to take objectives and outfarm SGC until he could carry the game. eHome ended up looking very strong coming out of the group. IG actually looked kind of shaky considering they were one of the tournament favorites because I mean they really did. They were very close to going out into the lower bracket. If they lost that game to SGC, they would have. But other than that one game against IG, SGC looked pretty bad, and Mineski did as well. eHome and IG both played very heavy team fighting slash scaling. Like I said, I mean, IG played anti mage twice. Um, Compared to other teams, they had far lower emphasis on Nature's Prophet, and the other one that they didn't care about at all was Vengeful Spirit, which I thought was the right call. For reasons unknown to me, there were like a couple teams, especially during the group stage. It saw less prio during the bracket, but man, during the group stage, there were teams that seemed utterly convinced this hero was the shit. I mean, we're talking first pick Vengeful Spirit. Spoiler alert, it was not the shit. Unfortunately, there was a game in this group that I couldn't find the VOD for, or I found a 480p VOD of it, but that was like not watchable. And unfortunately, it was the banger eHome versus IG, which ended up going 90 minutes. If anybody's got like a link to that in the comments, let me know. But I'm thinking there's probably just not a good VOD of it in existence, which is very unfortunate because I would have liked to watch it. Group B had OK Nirvana International with Fear, Pycat, 1437, and the Universe as a sub. OK Nirvana China had Banana and Yao, Tailu, another Chinese team, playing with DD, Hao or Love Silva, as he went by at the tournament, and Faith, also one of the more questionable Chinese invites, along with OK Nirvana China. I mean, as I said earlier, LGD and DK probably should have been invited instead of these teams, but it's pretty likely they just turned the invite down. And the last team was the other replacement team, Virus Gaming, who was a French stack of basically complete nobodies other than Saksha. And I mean, the only reason people really know him is because he was eventually the coach of the two-time OG TI winners. Pike had a very strong performance for OK International, having three pretty hard carry performances on Anti Mage and Slardar. And then this third game on Sniper of all heroes, he ended up picking the first Rampage of the tournament up, which was also the first Rampage of professional Dota 2. But a lot of that was because Virus ran it down relentlessly in that match. He had like 22 kills or something like that. It's crazy. But honestly, that aside, OK International would look amazing. I mean, as I said earlier, I think you could have put them in basically any other group, and they probably wouldn't have made the upper bracket. It really just came off of Tyloo, OK China, and obviously Virus were bad, but those two teams looking pretty meh. I mean, Tyloo had some moments with DD and Love Silva looking solid, but yeah, I mean, as I said, Virus looked terrible. I mean, they didn't go longer than 35 minutes in any of their games, and they just got smashed in every lane, and then got smashed in every team fight after lane. It it didn't look very fun to be a Virus player during this group stage. Group C was by far the most interesting group, and it also had some of the most entertaining games of the group stage due to mostly Meet Your Makers, which was a Danish stack with Misery and Demon, playing push comps, and this was the first group where the more aggressive push comps got pulled out with various combinations of Nature's Prophet, Shadow Shaman, Chen, and Venomancer. Other teams in the group were CIS Squad Moscow 5 with players like NS, Arzart, and G. Made in Thailand, who had Lakels, and MUFC, who had KYXY and Net on their team. The main reason this group was interesting is the parity it ended up having. This is the only group in which a team didn't go 3-0 because Made in Thailand took down Moscow 5 in the final game of the group because SD had a monster Leshrac performance. He actually also looked great on it in the other game when she played it. But this introduced another gripe with the format, which is the tiebreaker system. MYM, Moscow 5, and Myth all went 2-1. And unfortunately for Myth, in the game against MUFC, they went down in the early to mid game, but this was because MUFC played Marana and Likels played Anti-Mage. Like, Made in Thailand literally built their draft around going down early and coming back later because Anti-Mage is the hardest scaling hero that was in the pool for this tournament. Which, I mean, is exactly what happened. I mean, Myth smoked them after like the 40-minute mark because Likels got absurdly fed. But because the game went 56 minutes, MYM and Moscow 5 didn't have a game that went anywhere near that long. So Myth went to the lower bracket. I mean, them choosing to select Anti Mage essentially put them in the lower bracket. Like game time is just a terrible mechanic to use for tiebreakers in a MOBA. By the way, a certain other MOBA that also ran BO1s in their bracket until 2023 also runs game time as a tiebreak. I think they still do it to this day, actually. Shout out Riot Games, man. These guys are they're very intelligent. Um, but yeah, I mean, like I said, MOBAs famously have strategies in which you want the game to go as long as possible, and like it just makes game time an awful mechanic. I mean, I the thing is, there really isn't another tiebreak mechanic. I think you probably would just have to play out the three BO1s again. Probably, I don't really know what else you could do because like kills is not good because especially in this era of Dota, like teams would really go for kills over farming. So sometimes like a high kill score didn't actually mean you were ahead. I mean, we'd see in the bracket and plenty of games in the groups where a team would be up like 10 or 15 kills and down 2,000 gold. So I guess to be fair, I don't know what I mean, the alternative would just not to be having BO1s, but you know, it is what it is, I guess. But that aside, MYM looked really strong on the push comps. The only game they lost to Moscow 5, they didn't draft a push comp. They picked Earthshaker, Beastmaster, and one of the like only two or three Drow Ranger picks of the whole tournament. Playmate especially looked really good in the mid lane. He played Shadow Shaman and Nature's Prophet and looked very strong in both picks. I think MYM probably is going to have Nature's Prophet instaband against them. I mean, NP is he's the biggest enabler of the push comp for sure because he's got the global pressure along with all the extra creeps that he spawns from the treants. Demon also played it as well, so I mean they have multiple guys that can flex onto it. So it's just I mean that would just be a very scary pick to go up against if you're playing MYM. Moscow 5 showed a lot of versatility in the draft. They looked very strong too. Made in Thailand end up looking by far the strongest team that went to the lower bracket. I mean, I think if you, I mean, the reverse of OK International, I think if you put them in any group besides from probably A, I think they would have made it out in the uppers. I mean, Group B, they for sure would have. D is probably a toss up between them and Scythe. I don't think Scythe looked particularly excellent in the group stage, so I think it's very possible Myth could have won that game. And overall, MUFC looked pretty bad. Group D was, well, if you're a Navi fan, just go and rewatch all the games. Navi, I mean, you know, come on, we all know the roster, but I'll read it out. Art Style, Dendy, Xbot, Puppy, and Light of Heaven recorded the shortest game of the entire tournament against Gosu Gamers, who was just a mixed Western European stack of Kuroki and friends. They ended the game at 21 minutes and 54 seconds, and none of their other games went very far past the 30-minute mark. I mean, this group was all Navi, and honestly, they look impossible to draft against. I think I'm going to make another video on this, but Xbot was able to play all three games on Morana, and he smashed all three games on Morana because Puppy was drawing pocket bans in round one on Chen. Because the one game it got let through, he stopped. I mean, it was bad. Puppy was, as far as I could tell, the only player that was drawing pocket bans in round one. And Light of Heaven also looked unbeatable on the Nature's Prophet. Navi showed an ability to pull off the push comps and the team fight comps when Shen and Prophet were banned against them. Denny and Artstyle also both played two games of Ancient Apparition and Night Stalker, and Artstyle looked like the only player of the whole group stage who could really pull the Night Stalker off. Like in the earlier groups, I saw some prio on it, and whenever I saw people play it, I was like, why is Night Stalker getting banned so much? And then I saw Artstyle play it, and I was like, oh, okay, this is why. But due to the dominance they showed, I mean, Navi looked amazing coming out of this group. Like, I think most people probably would have had them as the favorites just because of how hard they smoked everybody. Scythe Gaming, who notably had Ice 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 on their team, ended up coming second in the group, pretty much taking care of business against the other two teams in the group. Honestly, it was hard to judge their level coming out of it just because Nevo, who was Cinderin's team, and Gosu Gamers just looked terrible. Playoff action kicked off with a domestic matchup between eHome and Tyloo. Former coming off a dominant group stage performance, while Tyloo looked significantly weaker. Both teams played heavy team fight in the group stage and kept this going, with eHome playing Spectre and Tyloo going with Doom, Weaver, and Earthshaker. eHome seemed to run away with the early game, with 357 on Sand King and PLT's Beastmaster running the map. However, Tyloo was able to actually stay even due to superior CSing, with all three of their laners having 60 CS at 14 minutes when nobody from eHome was even close. This was actually a really good example of what I was talking about earlier about how teams generally highly prioritized kills over farm in this tournament and this era of Dota in general. And it definitely just doesn't pan out in the way it probably went in most of their heads. The biggest problems for Tyloo in the mid game came from eHome being way more proactive, and Tyloo was really just unable to find and kill 820 on Spectre because of this. eHome was eventually able to secure Roshan after a mid fight around the 40-minute mark and push for Tyloo's base. The game kind of stalled out here because of the Veno pick from Kabu, but eHome were eventually able to secure Rex and take the game. The two replacement teams, SGC and Virus, would then face off in round one of the losers bracket. SGC played Protect Shadow Fiend, one of the only picks of that hero for the entire tournament, while Virus switched up their meta read after picking Venge, very high prio in the group stage, switched to Prophet, Mirana, Earthshaker, Puck, and Storm Spirit, which if you watch any of the later games, those all ended up being very powerful picks for the entire tournament, and some of the most common ones to the grand finalists, eHome and Navi, ended up playing a lot. And Virus was able to just execute very well on a great meta comp. They won the laning stage and were able to snowball it with a mid game fight where 769 got a 3-man Dream Coil, getting him an ultra kill, and Virus basically was able to starve out the map. And from then, it was a long closeout, but they eventually were able to take out SGC. Storm Gaming Clan was the first team eliminated from TI 2011, going out with $0 in prize money. Between OK Nirvana International and Invictus Gaming, and I found this to be an incredibly interesting matchup going in because these were two of the teams that was a bit harder to get a read on how good they actually were. As I said, OK 3-0'd their group, but mostly because, in my opinion, the three teams in that group were very mid and didn't look particularly strong. And IG lost to eHome in a 90-minute game, but also had some tricky games actually against the bottom two teams in that group as well. And overall, were in not the form that people were expecting. OK went all in off of Piket's stellar group stage performance, giving him a last big faceless void. IG, on the other hand, would go for a pretty classic Chinese team fighting comp, Beastmaster, Earthshaker, Lion, and Weaver, switching it up a bit with a Necrolite as well for push. IG ended up coming out ahead of the early game because the CS score was very even, and Zhao was able to pick up 3 kills on the Weaver. However, the game blew open for OK when Zhao, Shansheng, and 430 attempted to dive Piket under tower. 1437 was with him, and Venge swapped him to safety, and as they tried to disengage, Piket hit a chrono on 2 of them and killed both. Piket caught Zhao again 5 minutes later as he attempted to push a top tier 2, further accelerating the game state for OK, as Piket would have a 33-minute butterfly and hit a 5-man chrono later, killing 430 in show. The game would continue to teeter on a knife's edge as IG was able to stop OK's Roche by killing Piket in the river fight because he missed his chrono onto 430, who ulted him and saved his teammates, allowing DDC to unload the Lion Burst on Pycat and actually killed him. IG took Roshan and started to push and take OK's tier 2 turrets, and all of them were down by the 50-minute mark. OK tried to engage with the tier 2 mid, but because Roar pierced BKB, Pycat missed him again, got ulted again, and killed. IG retreated, began to set up for a potential Roche, but Pycat was able to catch 430 in his chrono this time, and Fear followed up with a 3-man coil for OK to win the fight. It took Roshan, and it looked pretty rough for IG at this point, but a ward in OK's jungle caught 4 of them retreating back to their base, and Pycat lagged behind to farm a wave, which allowed IG to catch, kill him, taking down his Aegis, and then forcing a buyback. IG regrouped for a final push and went into the base. As OK tried to engage on them, Pycat used his chrono too early, didn't catch DDC's Lion in the chrono, and he was unable to unload his CC on him, kill him, and IG took the game. Interestingly, this game marked 20 total games of Vengeful Spirit, and the hero had a 20% win rate, being 4-16. Luckily, going forward, teams put a lot less prio on this hero as they kind of found out that it wasn't really all that. But this just the prio and Venge up to this point pissed me off to no avail in the group stage, so I was just very happy to see a lot less of it getting picked. The next match for the losers bracket was MUFC and Next Evolution. The game itself didn't end up being very interesting, but it just marked another very similar composition to IG with a Weaver, Beastmaster, and Lion looking very good in a game. They were able to take down Next Evolution's attempt at playing anti-mage, but they just never were able to pick up any steam on it, and MUFC were able to close out the game before Angel could come online on it. The next game was a matchup between Made in Thailand and GGNet in the losers bracket. Made in Thailand, as I said earlier, was probably the strongest team in the lowers, and they really showed it here. Lakel's picked Morphling and slammed the entire game. Having a Lincoln Sphere by minute 14, Made in Thailand was able to set up a 4-1 split push and close the game out by 35 minutes. By the time the game ended, Lakel had 278 CS, which was pretty high at the time for a 35-minute game. GGNet ended up being the only team at TI to not win a game, and were sent home. The next matchup, Navi versus Moscow 5, was the most anticipated game of the entire first round. These teams had domestically gone back and forth, playing each other in pretty much every grand finals of Eastern European events. As mentioned earlier, the draft pretty much favored Navi from the get-go. Puppy was able to first pick the Chen, as Moscow 5 had to deny Nature's Prophet from Light of Heaven, and actually picked Night Stalker away from Artstyle as well. But Dandy and Xbot were able to play their comfort heroes, Ancient Apparition and Morana. The problem for Moscow 5 came when they really weren't able to get anything done on the first night cycle, which is really where you need to be on your game if you're playing a Night Stalker composition. So Navi was able to get 3 kills in Artstyle during that time, which was just a disaster for Moscow 5's chances of winning the game. This was the Gem of True Sight bug game, but as I was watching this, to be totally honest, I didn't think it affected it that much. I think it was very likely that Navi would have just won this game anyway, because, as I said earlier, Moscow 5 really needed to get an early lead, because Artstyle's Viper scaled way harder than any of their heroes, and they really weren't able to do that. Anyway, Navi was able to end the game by around the 35-minute mark and move on to the upper bracket semifinals. Next lower bracket game was a clown fiesta from 2 of the worst teams of the tournament, OK Nirvana China and Mineski. OK ran a generic teamfight comp, Beastmaster Weaver, and then an Enigma as a little bit of supplemental engage. Mineski went for Slardar and Morana for a bit more of a mid-game style, and honestly, this game was just very boring overall, but it mostly came down to OK China's comp having some pretty severe weaknesses, with Enigma really being their only super reliable AoE engage, and due to the mobility of Slardar and Marana, Vineski was able to maneuver around it relatively well and eventually take the game when it went late enough for Jules to get enough items on his Marana to take Rex and end. Side note, this game marked Earthshaker being 13-3. Yeah, this hero is very good. I'm really not sure why it didn't get picked more until now. I mean, this was around the point in the tournament where his prio did rise sharply and Venge's really plummeted. Venge didn't get picked a whole lot outside of the group stage and the first round or two of the bracket. But yeah, I really am just not sure why it took teams so long to catch this pick because there were teams playing during the group stage and looking great on it. But I guess ability to read meta is very important at tournaments, but this seemed pretty obvious to me, if I'm being completely honest. The final upper bracket quarterfinal and last game of the first round overall saw two of the more interesting teams facing off in MYM and Scythe Gaming. This was just two teams where when I was starting to go into the bracket stage, I wasn't 100% sure where these teams were going to shake out because, I mean, Scythe was just against Navi and Shitters, and they just fell in between them. And then MYM just looked decent in a decent group, but it was really hard to get a read on how they'd play against some of the top teams. Anyway, unsurprisingly, MYM played a push composition, recycling the core of their comp from their group stage game against Made in Thailand, which they won handily. They ran a Prophet, Leshrac, Slardar, and Shadow Shaman. Scythe played more ganking skirmish with Enchantress, Sand King, Marana, Tide, and Razor. Ice played the early game incredibly well on Enchantress, applying enough pressure and ganking so that MYM wasn't actually able to get a whole lot of their push off as quickly as they would have liked. Due to this, MYM tried to force fights a bit too hard in the mid game, and it allowed HYHY's Sand King to look just incredible because of the amount of units that would have been grouped up, allowing for extra epicenter damage. The game started to accelerate more for Scythe when they were able to pick Mania off in the bot lane jungle with his BKB on cooldown, which resulted for a Roshan in them at the 36-minute mark. They were able to take down the first tier 3 tower in mid after Playmate just got caught out trolling trying to push a top wave with his TP scroll on cooldown. There was a brief scary moment. Scythe tried to push the mid barracks and lost a fight because they just didn't deal with the Serpent Wards and a 4-man illusion wall, but Scythe was able to smoke up and sneak a Roche while MYM tried to push the top lane, and from there they were able to take all 3 sets of Rex and Mega Creeps, and it was just way too much for MYM to deal with. Scythe would move on to play eHome in probably the biggest upset of the entire first round. In other news, Marana is 9-3. I wonder which team this is going to really help out. Kicking off the second day of the main event were MYM and Virus Gaming. In this game, both teams ended up playing with a variation of global pressure, Virus taking Prophet and a carry Morphling, while MYM interestingly picked up Tinker for only the second time in the entire tournament. This game started out great from the rip for MYM, who went up 1k gold by 4 minutes off of nothing but smashing lanes, and the game was relatively even for a while after that, but past the 20-minute mark, Saksha and Pseudo trolled on cooldown. Playmate and Demon both had their boots of travel at this point, and it was just over. It was over. There was too much. There was too much pressure for Virus to deal with. Tinker and Beastmaster with boots of travel is just an instant kill on anybody they caught. MYM were able to take down all the tier 2 turrets by 44 minutes, went Roshan shortly after, and the game was pretty much over from there. Virus were sent packing from TI with no prize money to show for it. Only the top 8 teams got a portion of the pool. Staying in the lower bracket, we had Made in Thailand and Tyloo face off. This game, Tyloo went back to basics, putting DD and Faith on Beastmaster and Witch Doctor, the 2 heroes that those players would both look best on in the group stage. Made in Thailand picked Lakel's the Morphling again, and he shit on everybody's faces again. Tyloo was able to stall this game out a little bit longer because Made in Thailand's comp was a little bit less suited for hard push than it was in their game against GG, but it was still a pretty dominant performance from Lakel's, and Tyloo would be the second Chinese team to get sent home from the tournament. Next match was Mineski, fresh off their first win of the tournament against Moscow 5, who had been knocked down by Navi. Mineski built their draft around protecting Jules on a Morphling, who I guess had just seen LK shit all over two teams in a row with it and was like, I can do that too. He couldn't, by the way. Moscow 5 built a lane pressure mid game skirmish comp with Lich, Slardar, Marana, and Leshrak. Straight out of the gates, M5 put the pressure on Mineski, getting kills in all three lanes, and G was just able to snowball hard off the Marana, just due to the mobility of it, and they were able to rotate him all around the map and get him a bunch of kills. At 17 minutes, they were so far ahead, they were able to go 5-0 in a team fight, and Santa hit a Lich ult that would make any Lich player cream their pants if they saw the enemy team grouped up like that. Even an almost perfect engage from John and Woots resulted in 0 kills. M5 were able to take the first tier 3 of the game at 25 minutes. All three sets of barracks followed shortly, and Mineski was sent home with their tail in between their legs. Final game of round 2 of the losers bracket was MUFC against OK Nirvana International. MUFC played the Morphling this game, third SCA team in a row, by the way, to do that. And OK decided to feed Pycat again, giving him an anti-mage. MUC started off the game well, getting 2 kills at level 1 and bullying Pycat out of 2 lanes. At 11 minutes, Silvercross had double his CS. Pycat got so far behind that he actually had to skip building his Battle Fury and went straight for a Manta style instead. During the early mid game, MUFC were able to turn around multiple gank attempts from OK. OK, however, would begin to come back when MUFC attempted to push for a tier 3 tower top lane at 34 minutes. Pycat CWM were able to flank and kill 4 members of MUFC on a counter engage Echo Slam and get Roshan afterwards, and OK was actually able to take down the first barracks of the game at 43 minutes. Both teams farmed up with not much action until 50 minutes when MUFC caught Pycat with Doom, and Silvercross got a quad kill in OK's base. However, multiple members were able to buy back and win the extended fight and pick up Roshan while MUFC had to reset. MUFC was actually able to win the next fight with an impressive 5-man ravage from Net and push for OK's mid barracks. They then went for the tier 4 towers trying to end the game. They were able to kill both, but they were unable to take the Ancient and lost 3 players retreating. MUFC regrouped to push the base yet again, seemingly won the first fight at 16 minutes, forcing out Pycat's buyback. However, Silvercross was unable to make it out to the secret shop in time to buy an item, and the Doom ult would be down for the next fight. OK took advantage of this timing, as Pycat was essentially unkillable. MUFC tried to jump on him and lost 3 players in the process of doing so. OK Nirvana was able to head to the base, and in one of the most shocking comebacks of the tournament, OK Nirvana International would move on to the next round of the lower bracket, taking down MUFC and sending them home. Beginning the upper bracket semifinals was surprise team Scythe Gaming versus eHome, who was still yet to drop a game. eHome went with tried and true team fighting and scaling comp, first picking Anti-Mage, along with Puck and Beastmaster, and Alina Sven Sport Duo. Scythe went for Windrunner, Prophet Venge, and Tiny, along with the Faceless Void for Chowie, in a very similar style of team comp. In this game, eHome actually decided to square off carries, with 820 going top directly against Chowie, and it didn't really go well for them. At 11 minutes, Chowie had 60 CS, 820 had 25. 820 swapped to the bot lane, and eHome ganked and killed Chowie top at the same time. However, that allowed Chowie to run straight to bot where he could continue to dominate the lane against 820. Another massive jump ahead for Scythe happened when Chowie used himself as bait, running too far in the bot lane while his team was smoked behind him, resulting in a gank that led to 820 and PLT being killed. Chowie rotated back to top, killed the tower, and was able to get his Battle Fury up at 19 minutes, compared to 820's eventual 33-minute Battle Fury. Scythe were able to farm up and take Roshan at 28 minutes, went to the bot lane to push their last remaining tier 2 turrets up. eHome attempted to fight bot, but lost all 5 without Scythe losing a single player because they were so far ahead. From then, the game was essentially over. Scythe, in probably the upset of the entire tournament, was able to smash eHome in 36 minutes. I guess now is a good time to revisit the best of one issue. Honestly, this game being a BO1 made the upset a little bit anti-hype, and it kind of devalued Scythe's accomplishment, in my opinion. Like, it was a smash. You could argue they would have won the second game anyways, but we'll really never know. And The other thing is, this is Ice's best placement at a TI, and the asterisk is probably just always going to be there. That to get third place at TI 1, all you need to do is win two BO1s, which, I mean, especially in a MOBA style game, can be very fluky. You see that a lot in league tournaments. I mean, as much as I shit on Valve for this TI format, I mean, they fixed it real quickly. TI is the best format in esports. I'm just going to say that over and over again because it's true, in my opinion. In all seriousness, though, the eye test still checks out. Scythe being one of the top teams at the event. I mean, they still took E home to 3 games in the second series, but I think this is always just going to be a slight asterisk on their run compared to other runs from upset teams. Navi and IG squared up right after to play for a chance in the winners' final where Scythe awaited. IG played around a Weaver, Earthshaker, and Lion that worked for them in the last game, along with Windrunner and Lich. Slap me if you've seen this one before. Navi played Viper, Marana, AA, and Nature's Prophet with Puppy on Sven. At this point, I've decided I'm going to make another video on Navi's drafting during this tournament, so go ahead and subscribe if you want to catch that. But Navi just smashed every draft in this tournament, in my opinion, and just had a lot of advantages that other teams really couldn't take care of. A bit of a change of pace for Navi. This one was far slower than every other game they've played. First Blood wasn't until 8 minutes, which was an art style double kill. Throughout the mid game, every fight went essentially even, with the kill score being 7 to 8 to Navi around 15 minutes. However, those went in Navi's favor as the majority of their kills went on to Artstyle, who would play their hard carry on Viper, while Zhao was far less involved in the fights, even though he had the highest CS. The game broke open for Navi at 22 minutes when IG attempted to push a bot lane turret. Navi teleported in, and as IG retreated, Dandy hit an absurd 5-man AA ult, allowing Artstyle to easily clean up 3 kills for Navi, who pushed out the bot lane tier 1 and 2 turrets. Navi won another fight in mid lane at 26 minutes with Light of Heaven and X-Bot diving IG's backline, while Zhao 8 was largely ineffective on the other side of the fight. Navi took the mid turrets, retreated back to take Roshan, and killed the last standing outer turret of IG's at 31 minutes. The fight that basically ended the game was at 38 minutes, with Navi going 4 for 1 as IG tried to engage on them in the bot lane, but Zhao had nowhere near the damage output required to bring down anyone on their team. After the fight, Navi took Roche, and it was a pretty simple closeout from them. Navi would cement their status as favorites, being the last undefeated team, as IG was sent to the lower bracket. Annoyingly, I was unable to find a VOD for the next game, which was a rematch of MYM versus Made in Thailand from the group stage. MYM won again, moving on to play IG in the lower bracket quarterfinals. The other match in the third round of the lower bracket was OK International versus Moscow 5. M5 played a gank push draft with Necrolite, Chen, Windrunner, Ancient Apparition, and Marana. While in an interesting switch up for what had been working well for OK, they put Pycat on a Weaver, along with an Earthshaker, Venge, Slardar, and Enigma to round out their team comp. The game started incredibly well for OK, as in the top jungle the two teams ran into each other at level 1, and CWM hit a 3-man fissure that set up 2 kills, and then was able to roam mid to gank and kill Arzard at minute 1. OK was getting kills all over the map, but Moscow 5 was actually able to get a gold lead by 10 minutes due to G smashing his lane. The game really broke open for Moscow 5, however, when, during a top fight at 23 minutes, Lacoste hit a 3-man black hole, but there was no follow-up, and Dread's channel was able to heal everyone back up. M5 killed 4 players and were able to take all 3 tier 2 turrets off the back of the fight. They were able to take Roshan after this while OK was pushing the top lane. OK was able to stall out the game for a while, but every fight essentially went the same way. Pycat's Weaver didn't do enough damage, and every single time, Dread was able to heal everyone back up to almost full health on Chen. M5 would take the game. After going 3-0 in their group, OK would go out in 7th to 8th place. The lower quarterfinals were up next, with MYM versus IG being the first game. In a surprising departure from their signature push style, MYM played an anti-mage comp with heavy gank pressure from a Night Stalker, Puck, Ancient Apparition, and Chen. IG played a pretty standard 5-man teamfight deathball comp around Necro with Doom, Beastmaster, Earthshaker, and Venge to support. The game was relatively slow for the first few minutes, but notably, Misery only had 15 CS on Anti-Mage at 8 minutes compared to Zhou's 42. Over the first night cycle, Playmate was able to get 5 KP total on the Night Stalker, so was able to relieve a little bit of pressure there. However, Misery ended up being way far behind show. He rushed a Battle Fury because of this, skipping his Vanguard and getting it at 19 minutes. And what followed after that is probably among one of the worst sequences I've ever seen in a game of Pro Dota. I mean, I'll just 4X this here, but this is just terrible. They let him farm for 10 minutes straight. They just group up as a five man and do literally nothing and give Misery the entire map. Like at 23 minutes, he has 150 CS. At 25, he's 182. And at 30 minutes, he has 260. And he had a Manta by 26 minutes. By the 33-minute mark, this kill score was 7-2, but MYM was up 14,000 gold. And Misery had a butterfly at 36 minutes. That's three items at 36 minutes for an anti-mage. From that point, the game was basically over. In one of the more shocking placements of the entire tournament, Invictus Gaming would go out in 5th to 6th. The next quarterfinal game would be one of the games of the tournament, in my opinion, with Moscow 5 and eHome, the last Chinese team after China being incredibly hyped pre tournament, would face off. Moscow 5 played heavy for backline dives around G on Storm Spirit, and in another team switching up, eHome played a Weaver and Tinker global pressure draft with Sand King and Earthshaker and Venge in a large departure from their hard team fighting style that they had played for the entire tournament up to this point. This game started well from M5, mostly due to X just sprinting it in mid, dying four times in the first 20 minutes. And they were all terrible deaths, honestly. Like, just way out of position against the Storm. He should know better than that, especially since one of his signature heroes at this event was Storm Spirit. The game slowed down but was very even from 20 to 30 minutes, with both teams taking down each other's tier 1 turrets by 32 minutes. After a huge team fight at 35 minutes that ended 3 to 4 in favor of eHome, the game slowed down heavily, mostly due to PLT and X applying pressure at every single point of the map for Moscow 5. Due to PLT's survivability with a Lincoln Sphere on Weaver and X having boots or travel, Moscow 5 was essentially forced to stay in their base the entire rest of the game, pushing lanes. PLT continued to power farm for another 20 minutes and had 5 items at a 64-minute Roche fight. Due to the massive goal discrepancy with the upper bracket final of Navi versus Scythe would be the first best of 3 of the entire tournament. I'm not going to rant about the format. No, I'm not going to do it. The first game was a complete stomp and was almost identical to Navi's group stage game against GGNet. Scythe discovered why everybody had been banning Artstyle's Night Stalker, and he fucking smashed this game, getting 12 kills total during the first night cycle, and Artstyle ended the game 12, 0, and 16. Now, I'll show you the picture of the second draft. Keen viewers will notice that Navi drafted the exact same comp, just with Viper instead of Night Stalker. For anyone who's keeping track, this is also Xbot's 7th game on Mirana. Navi have played 7 games this tournament, by the way. This game started far better for Scythe. They were able to dive Artstyle's tower at 5 minutes, kill the tower, then camp the lane and re-kill Artstyle when he came back. Due to Ice's global pressure on the Nature's Prophet, Scythe were also able to take all 3 tier 1 turrets by the 11th minute of the game. Scythe were able to leverage this lead into a Roshan and taking all 3 tier 2 turrets down by 33 minutes before Navi had returned a single turret kill. At 35 minutes, though, Ice and XY committed way too much to try and kill Xbot with the whole team of Navi relatively close. Both died, and Navi were able to kill their first mid turret and win another fight in mid, causing a 4K gold swing. Right after that, Chowie must have seen a hot girl in the crowd and looked away, because he just walked out of base in a straight line right into Xbot's arrow. That massive shutdown goal also went on to Artstyle, and Navi took the mid tier 2. Scythe attempted to go Roche at 45 minutes, but Navi decided to trade it for the tier 3 mid, and also were able to take down the Rax in that lane. However, they tried to fight for the end, which, given the game state, was smart for them because Scythe was still way more farmed than they were, but they stayed too long and 3 died. Scythe was able to take 1 Rax in the mid lane. 2 minutes later, Xbot was caught too far out of the base and killed. However, when Scythe pushed, Denny hit a 3-man ult, and Navi were able to push them back, killing XY and Ice. Navi pushed for the end at this point, And as they pushed into the base, Puppy blink ulted Chowie and was able to take him down. With Chowie down, Scythe didn't have enough damage to kill Artstyle, who at this point was insanely tanky, having just completed his Heart of Tarask, and Navi was able to complete a shocking comeback and would move on to the Grand Finals. Final match of the day was the best of three, seeing eHome play MYM in the losers bracket semifinal. In the first game, MYM played the exact same push comp to beat Virus with in round 2 of the lower bracket, and eHome played Doom, Prophet, Storm Spirit, Ancient Apparition, and Venge. MYM started out the game fairly strong in lane, but FCB was power farming on Doom. He had 117 CS at 20 minutes, compared to Misery's team high 74. Even though the kill score was 13 to 4 in favor of MYM at that time, the gold was essentially even. Later in the game, FCB became literally unkillable unless all 5 MYM players tried to commit everything onto him, which they did in a fight, and eHome just smoked them and ended the game right after that happened. In the second game, eHome themselves picked the Tinker along with Weaver, Windrunner, Lich, and Lion. MYM played an anti-mage comp, and as Misery would soon find out, it's a lot harder to pull off anti-mage when the enemy team doesn't hand you the entire map for free. MYM started the game decently again, however PLT would step up on Weaver for the second game in a row, getting 2 kills between the bot lane towers at 8 minutes. X also began to take over the game after 20 minutes, killing Demon mid and then TPing bot lane to kill Mania with PLT and take the T1. Him and PLT began to apply pressure reminiscent of the game against Moscow 5, taking the other Tier 1 turrets by 27 minutes. From then on, eHome were able to starve out MYM, and eventually close out the game in easy fashion. eHome would move on to play Scythe in the losers bracket final on the last day of the tournament. eHome versus Scythe Gaming would start off the final day of the tournament, eHome coming off a huge lower bracket run, while Scythe coming off a crushing loss to Na'Vi. First game saw eHome build a split pressure draft with PLT on the Weaver again, while Scythe went for a hard push comp to create space for their anti-mage, alongside with Chen, Pugna, and Veno. Scythe started off the game well, winning their lanes and taking 2 turrets before 15 minutes. Chowie was also able to kill PLT in lane on anti-mage, and they were up around 5,000 gold. eHome momentarily began to mount a comeback by killing 3 in a top lane fight, but Scythe was able to bring it back when Chowie got a triple kill at 24 minutes, chasing eHome after they attempted to gank. All of eHome's outer turrets were gone by 26 minutes. Scythe were able to take Roshan by 30 and take the mid lane racks right after with a great Echo Slam Mana Void combo that instantly blew up 2 members of eHome. Final fight of the game was over before it began due to PLT TPing into the base as Scythe pushed and time lapsed back to the top lane after he took a bunch of damage, allowed Scythe to clean up the fight and take the game. Game 2 saw a somewhat similar matchup to the first game between the teams in the upper bracket semi, with Scythe picking the Void again, along with Windrunner, Veno, Lion, and Ancient Apparition, while eHome took Beastmaster, Anti-Mage, and Puck. This time the early game went far better for eHome. For most of the laning stage, 820 had double Chowie's CS. They were able to find 2 massive kills on Chowie, one with him going too far to gank and blowing ult while X and PLT counter-ganked and killed him. And eHome camped the lane, smoked up, re-killed Chowie as he returned to lane. 820 would eventually get his Battle Fury up 10 minutes earlier than Chowie. eHome was able to take all 3 Tier 1 turrets in the space of a few minutes. PLT and X found Chowie in the jungle again and took his Tier 2 tower, basically completely starving him out of any farm. eHome was able to snowball this lead into a Roshan at 30 minutes and ended soon after. Final game of the series, Grand Finals on the line. HY says, "Fuck you, pick me Shadow Fiend." Scythe took a massive gamble this game, picking HY his signature hero, who was way out of the meta, had only been played 2 other times this tournament, and hadn't looked great. And unfortunately for them, it didn't pay off. eHome were able to draft a perfect counter to it with a Doom and Clockwork, and picked a far safer hard carry and anti-mage. If this game went past 40 minutes, eHome essentially had a guaranteed victory. However, they didn't even need it. At 9 minutes, eHome were ahead in all 3 lanes, and X was able to TP to the bot lane at 11 minutes to kill HY. At this point, eHome were up 3k gold. The game stayed mostly stable until a great sequence from eHome at 25 minutes, where X was able to catch HY pushing a tier 1 with a long range hook shot, and PLT was able to TP and doom him for the kill. They then ran down to mid, got a kill, and took both turrets off this. From then, the game was essentially over. PLT was far too tanky, and Scythe allowed 820 to get online too early during the window when they should have been strongest. eHome would take the series 2-1, moving on to play the grand final against Navi for $1 million. Support and just not having quite as much impact to carrying games on split push Weaver. It's I mean these two have been great for eHome's lower bracket run, and I mean they're the biggest tragedies of TI 2011. I mean these guys were on great teams after this and just never quite got it over the line. I mean that DK team in particular, if they had had majors in 2014 or 2013, 2014, they would absolutely have won a few of them. And it just sucks that those guys never got theirs. Navi would start the grand finals with a one game advantage due to coming from the upper bracket, and were still yet to lose a single game in the entire tournament. In the first game, eHome ran the same core of Nature's Prophet, Doom, and Storm Spirit that they've ran multiple times at this point in the event. As for Navi, yeah, that's a last pick Pudge. Other than that, Navi played a pretty standard comp, though, from what they've been running in the tournament. In very similar fashion to what he'd done in previous games, FCB started incredibly strong in lane on Doom, power farming with a 5-minute Vanguard into a 20-minute Radiance. The laning stage, other than that, was back and forth, with the Pudge getting some solid value on some ganks, but the gold stayed even. Ehom was out farming Navi due to the global presence from PLT's Prophet. However, Navi was able to take both outer turrets in mid, and knowing they were behind, tried to push a tier 3 at 21 minutes. Ehom were able to defend and sneak a Roche right after, and eventually take down Navi's mid turrets, the last remaining for them. Navi tried to force mid again at 25 minutes, but A20 hit a great swap and avenge. As he was getting hooked, they got art style killed and allowed Ehome to defend. They defended again in very similar fashion to force Puppy to TP Dendy back to the base, who Puppy was insane this game with the Chen saves. It was pretty crazy. Ehome at this point, though, was also up 10,000 gold. Ehome defended multiple more times and were finally able to get something off the back of a fight due to 820 swapping Chen so that no one could be TP saved. Ehome was able to take Roshan and won a mid fight due to FCB being way too tanky, having Vanguard, Radiance, BKB, and Ashivas at 39 minutes, and were able to take down the first tier 3 of the game in mid lane. Ehome pushed mid again 10 minutes later. Navi attempted to flank them but only killed Ehome's supports, and X and PLT sent out the retreating members to create enough space for FCB to take down the melee racks in mid. Navi attempted one final push, however, eHome were way too far ahead by this point and were able to win the game after taking the fight against Navi. X ended this game 17-2 and 16 on Storm Spirit. Just a great teamfight performance for him overall, keeping eHome alive in the tournament. With the series now tied 1-1, the next game would influence the outcome of the series heavily, and Navi completely switched it up. Instead of Spectre, which they had been banning the entire tournament along with Anti-Mage, Navi banned Nature's Prophet, seemingly thinking the Spectre would be easier to deal with. However, they first picked it themselves, and Xbot played his first game of the entire tournament on a hero that wasn't Mirana. This is also a massive departure from Navi's normal playstyle, which was heavily geared towards smashing the early game and trying to end before 40 minutes. eHome went for another tried and true combination of theirs, PLT on the Weaver and X on Tinker. After the laning stage, eHome were able to eke out a slight advantage. However, Navi would be able to get Xbot out of the map incredibly early with Haunt to clean up fights. He got a kill top on 357, and then 3 minutes later a double kill in mid. At 17 minutes, Navi also snuck a Roshan, with the Chen and Enigma creeps doing a lot of work. eHome engaged on them right after and went 2 for 2, however, both of Navi's kills went to the Spectre, who was 5-0 and 1 by this point, even though he was down in CS slightly to PLT. PLT was able to leverage his lead in the bottom lane, split pushing, killing both outer turrets and bot by 25 minutes. eHome also took the mid tier 1 and went 4 and 2 in a fight, killing Spectre. He got both of Navi's kills again, though. Navi eventually started Roshan again at 33 minutes and went 4 for 1 off the back of a huge ravage from art style. However, they weren't really able to get much off it. What they were able to do, however, was completely starve eHome of farm. PLT was really the only player on eHome to get any sort of farm, but interestingly, he used it on a BKB, playing into Enigma and Beastmaster, the two heroes that were available this tournament that have BKB piercing ultimates. Navi were able to take Roshan at 45 minutes, and as they pushed into the base, Dendy hit a 3-man blink ult, and Navi took the mid and bot racks, and it was an incredibly easy closeout from there. Navi would go up 2-1 in the series. They would change it up yet again in the third game, picking Weaver and Puck for the first time all tournament, while allowing eHome to get the same core combination that had beat them in the second game of the series of Doom, Prophet, and Storm Spirit. SCB started the game power farming. At this point, that was just to be expected. Navi, however, would win the objective fight, taking far more turrets than Ehome during the early mid game. And at 25 minutes, they would find Ehome's support duo walking just outside the base and were able to insta-kill them. For whatever reason, FCB, PLT, and X decided to commit to the fight, and two of them went down, also forcing a buyback from FCB. Navi were able to go even in the ensuing fight after the buyback, as well as taking down the melee racks in the mid lane. They went Roche, and after taking it, in one of the plays of the tournament, Denny would blink out of the back of the pit and hit an absurd four-man dream coil. Navi was able to ignore FCB as Artstyle, Xbot, and Dendy dove the backline, giving Xbot an ultra kill on the Weaver. Artstyle stole the rampage and took down a tier 4 turret before retreating. After a victory stride walking down mid to push again, Navi took down Ehome's Ancient, winning the first iteration of TI and walking home with $1 million.